The bye rounds for the AFL 2023 season are done and dusted, but finished with a little bit of controversy and some history making, be it both for better and for worse. Join me today as we recap round 15 before locking our tips in for round 16. Sit back, relax, let's get this one underway. Round 15 kicked off at GMHBA Stadium with Geelong taking on Melbourne in a game that I felt Melbourne were primed to win just based on Melbourne's intercept defensive game that they have built for a number of years, and I felt that the way Geelong had been transitioning the football from defence and midfield into the forward line really set up players like Jake Lever and Stephen May to get on the end of a lot of intercept marks and to rebound that ball out of their defensive 50 quite easily. It was hammered into that fact more so by Jeremy Cameron being taken out by an errant elbow from Gary Rowan. Forgot his name for a minute. I was going to say Ginger Nut, but I might have offended some Ginger fans in the crowd. But Rowan comes through, accidentally collects Jeremy Cameron in the head, knocks him out, and he's out for the rest of the game. And that happened pretty early in the contest. So, in the grand scheme of things, you would think that a player of Jeremy Cameron's calibre would have left a big hole in the forward structure of Geelong and would have allowed Melbourne to get their defensive game running at a new level. But cometh the moment, cometh the man. Gary Rowan takes Jeremy Cameron out and ends up standing up tall as probably best on ground for Geelong in the game. He is an absolute live wire of a player, and just like fine wine, seems to have gotten better with age, because I think earlier on in his career he showed glimpses, but he was never as consistently damaging as he has been for Geelong over the last couple of years. He's got a shitload of speed behind him and run down tackles, and just the pressure he puts on the ball carrier is phenomenal. His goal kicking ability is elite. He rarely misses and he loves ramming them home from long range. And I feel as a forward, especially in Geelong's forward line, when you've got the likes of Hawkins and Jeremy Cameron, Gary Rowan is very underappreciated and, underrated in the aspect that not many people have him in conversations. Not many people talk about him, but he did what he had to do to stand tall and get the Cats over the line in a game where, as I said, Jeremy Cameron gets taken out early. Patrick Dangerfield doesn't get up because of the injuries he sustained the week prior. Cam Guthrie's still out injured. Some other key players still out injured. They're starting to get on the rise, Geelong. They're starting to really make a run for it. And out of the teams that are currently within that, 7 to 12 mix on the ladder, I think Geelong's probably the most likely to have that push home to get into the top 8, albeit probably one of the more challenging runs home compared to some of the other teams that have, softer or easier runs home in comparison. Melbourne, on the other hand, I think they're severely lacking Clayton Oliver in the midfield. And even though he's an accumulator, and some would argue that some of his disposals are nothing disposals, he'll get maybe a 1-2 handball that doesn't really get them anywhere. But the fact that he just finds a way to draw the ball to himself and move the ball on, I think is very critical to Melbourne's midfield setting up their presence early. And I think there's something a little bit deeper that needs to be looked at when it comes to Clayton Oliver missing all these weeks, because he had his hamstring injury. He'd recovered from that, but he fell victim to an infection that had him hospitalised. He got over that, but now apparently this hamstring is getting strung out for longer than it should be, and there's a lot of speculation and rumour going around currently that he's been spotted out and about, socially doing some things that maybe he shouldn't be doing. So Melbourne have been hesitant in bringing him back and have been penalising him for it. Now, that's just speculation, and obviously people can get the rumour mill churning as much as they want. But if that is the case, that would definitely explain the fact that when it comes to him training, he looks fine, but then all of a sudden he's not fine to take the field. So definitely look a little bit deeper into that if you're a Demons fan or you just have a little bit of curiosity. St Kilda hosted Brisbane at Marvel Stadium in a game that I felt, even though here in Melbourne St Kilda should have gotten the job done, Brisbane have been able to shake the monkey off the back when they travel when it comes to Marvel Stadium. It seems to be the MCG where they struggle, but Marvel Stadium, they've got no drama coming down here and getting some damage done. And from the get-go, it never looked like St Kilda were in this contest. Brisbane had a stranglehold on the game from start to finish, and their systems just stood up tall. They were able to move the ball within a forward line that have been one of the best, if not the best, defensive structures in the competition all year. The midfield got on top of the game rather early, and defensively, Brisbane were just finding avenues and ways to continue to move the ball on, and it was kind of a haphazard style from St Kilda again that we saw against Richmond in the wet, where moving the ball on long and then allowing your opponent to get easy intercept was causing, Brisbane to have easy accessibility to the ball behind the play and to be able to move the ball in. And, players like Harris Andrews and like Payne really relish those opportunities to take intercept marks and get that rebound game going. Young Jasper Fletcher, another good showing from him. Lockie Neal standing up tall, Dunkley standing up tall. The usual culprits got it done, but the young kids for Brisbane really starting to rise to the occasion as well. And I said a couple of videos ago, when it comes to players like Ashcroft, Jasper Fletcher, now Kai Lohman, I think Brisbane, in the position they're in, they can still play these kids within this structure to not only maintain ladder position and win games, but continue to get exposure into these kids and make them all better for it. On the flip side of things, St Kilda went from being a team that was primed to finish in the top 4 to dropping off the mark a little bit, and they've obviously had some personnel issues in the way of injuries this year, and some players maybe not living up to their full potential. Some players get off the chain one week and then the following week aren't as damaging as they should be, and that's the same for, you can argue that for many teams in the competition this year. But for a team that started off as strong as they did, not only, showing us what they're capable of, but the supporter base getting up and about, and getting excited about the brand they were playing, the drop-off that we have seen over the last month or so has been pretty damaging to their season. My oh my, if I could skip over this game. Sydney hosted West Coast at the SCG. Now, this was a game that I was convinced Sydney had at least a 10-plus goal win guaranteed here. West Coast, I've said it a few times and I'll say it again, will not win a game for the rest of the season. I don't know when their next win is going to come at all. They could probably go the next 2 or 3 seasons with maybe only, 5 to 10 wins collectively, the way they are playing. This game made the history books for many reasons, both on the better side of things and the worst side of things. The worst side being, this was West Coast's biggest loss in their history of being within the AFL. For Sydney, this was the fourth biggest win in AFL VFL history. It's also the biggest win that Sydney has ever had in AFL VFL history. West Coast continue the trend of losing more games by 100 plus points than they have just won at all by any margin. And, as a neutral fan watching this game, I found myself wanting to see Sydney kick 200 plus points, because it's an enigma of the game. It is very rarely seen. The last time we saw this was when Geelong defeated Melbourne back in 2011, so 12 years, since we have seen a team rack up more than 200 points in a game of football. And it was just an absolute masterclass from Sydney. However, I'm starting to step back and really question, is this a reflection on how good Sydney is, or is it more so a reflection of how poorly West Coast is playing, given the fact that West Coast have given up in the last 8 weeks? I think there's 4 or 5 games that have been 100 plus points or thereabouts in the way of losses. Accumulatively, over the last 2 weeks since Ryan Marich coming from the mid-season draft into the club has been on the back end of defeats that tally over 250 points combined. These are damning stats, and questions are being asked about where West Coast are at, and you could see some senior players aren't living up to the expectation, and I feel unjustly the buck has been passed to young kids, and the young kids not being ready, and Adam Simpson keeps talking about that, and I think it's a bit of a fucking cop-out if you ask me. If a kid is on an AFL list and given the opportunity to play, as a coaching staff and a selection panel, you are backing those kids in to be good enough, and the kids that have featured for West Coast have shown talent. It's just the fact of the situation going on at West Coast just hasn't given them opportunity to shine. People are questioning where it needs to change. I personally think it needs to be a clean out from staff right through to the playing group. They need a new head coach, they need a new head of football, they need a new head of fitness. They're going to probably have to look at their list and trade off some of their older talent if they want to go elsewhere. Already, I believe Barras has been tied to a potential move to Sydney. Jeremy McGovern has been floated around as a potential mover via a trade. So, for clubs that are in the window, they can have a look at West Coast list here, and they could bolster their stocks by picking up players that maybe they might only have, 3-4 years left in their career, and pick them up potentially maybe even cheaper than what they're getting paid at West Coast, just for the opportunity to get them off a sinking ship and being able to play elsewhere. And I feel that is going to be the case for a lot of players. Some players might want to stick, true and thin to the club, but at the end of the day, players play football for the hope of winning a premiership, and West Coast have gone from winning a premiership to, adding different kind of silverware and crockery to the cabinet. So I think there's going to be a big shake-up come the end of the year West Coast way. I can feel it coming. Fremantle hosted Essendon at Optus Stadium, and I backed in Fremantle to get the job done. I just thought the return of Sean Darcy the week prior, we've seen Fremantle play without him and struggle quite severely. I still argue, had he played in the game against Richmond, Fremantle probably win that game. And Sean Darcy has come out and proven just how critical a role he plays for Fremantle. Just allowing Luke Jackson the ability to go forward and become a threat. Like, he was clunking marks left, right and centre down that end of the ground. It's just pivotal to realise, as I said, Luke Jackson isn't a number one ruckman. He's a great ruckman in support. He works well as a key forward, but as a solo ruckman, it's not currently within his forte. So Sean Darcy coming back in allows Luke Jackson to get off the chain, but then also allows that switch to happen and allow Luke Jackson to get in the ruck, Sean Darcy go down forward. And even though we saw an instance of Sean Darcy kicking it flat into the man on the mark, it's still the ability to clunk contested marks in the forward line and either set up a shot on goal or move the ball on, either way of disposal or bringing it to ground and allowing the smaller players like a Liam Henry or Michael Walters to sweep on through and get the ground ball. And I feel Fremantle have really started to recapture the form that we have seen them, have against teams when they defeated Geelong, when they defeated Melbourne, when they're defeating the top end talent, but then they taper off against teams that are sitting thereabouts in the middle of the mix. People start to question where they're at, but I think they're really starting to find their feet again. On the flip side of things, this was a game Essendon, I feel, really needed to win. Now, they've still got another game against North Melbourne, and I think they play West Coast again as well. I think they're one of the only teams in the comp that doubles up on North Melbourne and West Coast, which you would think from those 4 games, they would net themselves, a full 16 premiership points. The fact that North Melbourne had an arm wrestle in that game against them that came right down to the wire. The rematch could well and truly be in the balance and could be a deciding factor in Essendon's season, which is why Essendon need to take opportunity where they can. You know, Zach Merritt on AFL 360 has already said, even though people are saying, you know, they've got an easy run home, they don't see any game as an easy game. They take each week as it comes, and every game is both winnable and losable. And they dropped the ball in a game where, you know, you'd think that they would have the manpower to get over the line, especially, you know, getting Darcy Parish back in the mix and really bolstering that midfield. You know, Peter Wright's come back in at the right time, and you'd think that, you know, with his height and his marking and goal-kicking ability, he would be more damaging than what he has been. So questions are being asked. Essendon are still within the top 8, but will they finish in the top 8 come the end of the year? Yet to be determined. Collingwood hosted Adelaide at the MCG in one of the games of the season, which ended in a little bit of controversy. It was a game where, for the second time this season, Adelaide have held Collingwood to a goalless quarter. They dominated the first half, Collingwood, and very similarly to the Port Adelaide-Geelong game, where Geelong had a handle on that game, and then Port Adelaide went into the break at halftime. Ken Hinkley probably stripped paint off the walls, and then Port Adelaide came out and played one of the best 3 quarters of football I've seen played in a long time. Adelaide did the same thing. Adelaide came out and kicked a 7-0 third quarter and set themselves up for a huge upset. And I said in last week's video that if there was going to be an upset of the round, Adelaide against Collingwood could really provide that for us. And even though I had tipped Collingwood, and spiritually I have been somewhat of a Collingwood fan this season, I really wanted Adelaide to get up and win, purely because, you know, at the start of the season in my predictions video, I said I felt Adelaide would be the big improvers. And as the season's progressed, I really see Adelaide as the finals dark horse. I feel, outside of the teams that are well within the premiership conversation, Adelaide are the team that can cause the most damage. And this game come down to some potential non-decisions. Late in the game, Isaac Rankin takes a mark and clearly throws the ball off instead of getting the handball. Should have been a turnover for Collingwood. Rory Laird gets pushed in the back in the dying moments of the game, deep in his forward 50, no free kick. With about 10 seconds to go in the game, Jamie Elliott strikes Jordan Dawson in the face, draws blood, no free kick. Jordan Dawson, after the game, remonstrated with the umpires, showing him that he had blood pissing out of his mouth, but obviously it's the end of the game, umpires aren't going to do nothing. Surprisingly, the AFL have come out and said that the umpires got this wrong and it should have been a free kick. Now, in isolation, you can see it was a free kick. The umpires are arguing in real time they were blocked and they couldn't see this, you know, action happen. But I question, there's been another umpire put out there this year. There's 4 umpires. I don't know how not one of 4 umpires can see that Jordan Dawson has been connected head high and is bleeding on the ground. Just from the swinging motion of Jamie Elliott coming in with his arm should have been enough to show that he's come in with a striking or a motion that's caused, you know, connection. You know, but again, when the AFL does come out on rare occasion to admit fault, it's always after the fact, and after the fact of not being able to rectify the non-decision. And if Adelaide, you know, I'm not saying at all Jordan Dawson was 100% guaranteed to go back and slot that goal, but we have seen him in critical moments do so. So the likelihood was very, very likely. I would have given him probably 95% to slot that. If Adelaide ended up falling short of the top 8 purely off of just 4 premiership points, this particular non-decision is going to rue them for the entire off-season and pre-season. I'm not going to get more into it because social media has been blowing up about it, but yeah, a very good game of football. I feel tarnished by a non-decision and the umpires not having the sack to make the right calls. And the round ended with Gold Coast hosting Hawthorn out their way, Heritage Bank. And it was a game again where I said I felt Hawthorn had the potential to get up and win this game. And in the first quarter, it was only a few points the way of Hawthorn at quarter time, but I felt they had dominated the contest. Had a lot of the ball, was moving it quite seamlessly. They looked like they had control of the game, and after me thinking that, it fucking just imploded and went downhill from there. And in the end, Hawthorn only managed to kick 2 more goals for the entire game. They kicked 3 goals in the opening quarter. They managed to kick 2 for the remaining 3 quarters, while the Gold Coast went on to register 101 points collectively. Yeah, it just leaves me scratching my head. We get Hawthorn 1 week playing some absolutely tremendous football, and some of the best football that I've seen out of Hawthorn in recent years with this young team, especially with, gutsy wins against St Kilda and Brisbane. And then they come out against a team that they really have opportunity to put their foot down and assert themselves into the competition as not a team that's been tanking and throwing games deliberately, like some people have suggested. And they just faded out. I don't understand. And on the flip side of the coin, Gold Coast have taken opportunity where they really need to take it. They need to take opportunity with the teams at the lower end of the ladder and win convincingly. Not just bank the 4 points, but get a little bit of percentage as well, because they're still very much in the mix for the top 8. I've had a look at their run home, and I feel out of the teams outside of the top 8, they're probably one of the ones with the harder run home, and they probably do miss the top 8. But just seeing a collective growth and just seeing a different feel and different level of confidence with some of these players, I think they're finally on an upward trajectory. I don't know whether it's the case of maybe needing a new coach to mix things up, as good as Stuart Dew has been for that club. Sometimes a new face is good. We've seen Damien Hardwick step down from Richmond and Andrew McQualter come in. And since McQualter has come in, Richmond have only dropped the 1 game to put Adelaide by 10 points. Having a fresh face and a fresh take sometimes really can turn a club's thought process and ability around. And I think Gold Coast might be in a position where they need to look down that track. But a very good win by the Suns, and if you're a Hawthorn fan, you're probably left wondering what could have been. So after a perfect 6 out of 6 the week prior, this week I managed the 5 out of 6. I tipped Melbourne against Geelong, and that obviously didn't go my way. That was my only blemish for the weekend, so I'm really starting to find some tipping form. However, there were 3 players in our competition this week that managed the perfect round, and congratulations goes to Dusty Fendoff 4, Durable Lamb 6, and Gramercy Riffs 78, all tipping the perfect 6 out of 6. However, attention turns to whomever is sitting on top of the ladder, and we have a 2-way tie. We have a tie. Not a 2-way tie, we've got a tie. And it is Rockstar Pool 69 still sitting in number 1 position, with Saintly 12 sitting behind him in second place, but collectively both on 86 total tips. We have Eagles Making, Macca0303 and Benny Craig all sitting on 85, Frio 90, Majtig 77 and Team Wiggles all on 84, with Zirra TGK, myself in 9th position, with Matt Lamb and Vincey Boy all tied on 83. I went from being almost 7 or 8 tips behind to only being 3 tips behind the lead. It's really fucking shaking up. I can feel a comeback. We're aiming for the top 3, and I think it's coming. Round 16 sees a full round of games come back, and I'm so excited because even, with the buys, even the time slots with the games that we were seeing were absolutely ridiculous. I just feel, moving forward, instead of having 4 bye rounds, why don't we just take 1 week off where every single team gets a rest and every team comes back and plays the following week. That way we don't have teams feeling disadvantaged because they've had a bye and then they come back to play, where some teams are still running with momentum. I think that quells that conversation. Let me know in the comments section down below how you would handle that situation and what your thoughts are. But round 16 kicks off Thursday night. Gabba, Brisbane taking on Richmond. Brisbane heavily backed in here. However, my heart and my head tells me Richmond's form can really push Brisbane to their limits in this game. Richmond are 3-0 on the road this year. We have played, away from the MCG more than that. But we have defeated Adelaide at Adelaide Oval, GWS at Giant Stadium, Fremantle at Optus Stadium. We have proven we can win at the Gabba. Whenever Richmond and Brisbane have played each other in recent years, it has been a very tight contest. I'm backing Richmond in for this game by 13 points. Now, this is a game that is going to hamper Richmond a little bit in the way that Dion Prestia has a calf strain and will not be playing, and he's a critical cog and has been for recent years. But this season, we have proven that with the acquisition of Tim Taranto and other players really lifting their game, Dion Prestia doesn't have to carry the burden of that entire midfield on his back. And with Jacob Hopper coming back in this week, he'll be chomping at the bit to get his hands on that ball. So I expect the duo of Tim Taranto and Jacob Hopper to rack up 10 plus tackles combined. They're going to have 50 plus disposals combined, and I think they're going to help Richmond get over the line and win this game in a close contest. Friday night at the SCG, Sydney taking on Geelong. Now, at home after a 200 plus point, putting 200 points on the board, 171 point win, you would think, Geelong are going to get touched up in Sydney. Sydney are going to do a number on them. But I think quite the opposite. And my thought process here is Geelong played Melbourne in a contest that came down to the wire versus Sydney taking on West Coast, who pretty much allowed Sydney to have a training drill from quarter 1 to quarter 4. And I feel if Geelong come out the gates and apply pressure early, Sydney are going to be shell-shocked a little bit because they've just come off an incredibly easy win, and now they're taking on an opponent that is putting up much more of a fight. And I feel that could make Sydney retract a little bit. So I am going to back Geelong in this game. I'm not at all saying Sydney don't have it within them to win. I just feel when you compare the weeks that we have seen from both clubs prior, I feel if a team comes in with as much confidence as Sydney is going to be, I've just seen it happen so many times. A team comes off a really big win against an opponent that, isn't within contention, and then a contending team comes in and bang, you get hit by a roadblock. And I feel Geelong are going to be that roadblock for Sydney this week. Adelaide Oval, Adelaide taking on North Melbourne. I think this is all done and dusted. Adelaide in Adelaide. They're going to bounce back. They're going to have a sizable win. This is a win where they can, as I said before about Gold Coast, pick up percentage and really set themselves firm to finish in the top 8. But North Melbourne, they've been gutsy even in defeat. So even if Adelaide do win this game, expect North Melbourne to fight tooth and nail all the way to the final quarter. Marvel Stadium, Bulldogs taking on Fremantle. Now this is another game. I'm going to back the Bulldogs, but I feel there is room for upset from Fremantle here, and my decision could sway before this game comes down. And that's just purely knowing the fact that, defensively, Bulldogs have lost 3 key components, especially Liam Jones. Liam Jones out for 10 weeks is absolutely huge. That means that if the Bulldogs do make the top 8, Liam Jones isn't a guarantee to come back during the finals at all. And I think that hampers them defensively because they have been heavily reliant on his interceptability to really structure around in that defensive half. They're going to now have to rely on Alex Keays, who, for the most part, always has a look of confusion and just being lost on his face at all times. Fremantle now with Sean Darcy back in, as I said, having that eclectic mix of Darcy and Jackson, I feel they can expose the holes that the Bulldogs have, but I feel as a midfield group and the ability that McRae and Liberatore and Bontempelli all have to not only play midfield but be damaging in the forward half of the ground as well, I think that's going to be too hard for Fremantle to quell. Heritage Bank Stadium again, the Gold Coast taking on Collingwood. I think it's just as a formality as Adelaide taking on North Melbourne. I think Collingwood win this game quite convincingly. If Gold Coast can pull off an absolute heist, this keeps their season alive. Unfortunately, I don't see any universes where that comes to fruition. It could potentially be the case where, Doctor Strange comes in and says out of all the billion possibilities, maybe one of them turns out to be the one where the Gold Coast win. I feel that might be the case this week. MCG, Essendon, Port Adelaide. I think Port Adelaide come down. A lot of people are saying Essendon's going to beat Port Adelaide here, but this is where, as I said, Essendon really need to take their chances. They dropped the ball against Fremantle. If they drop the ball against Port Adelaide here, they are potentially at risk of dropping out of the top 8, and that would appease a few people, I'm sure. But I just think Port Adelaide are playing too good of a brand to drop the ball here. I really don't see them being in a position to drop many games coming at the back end of the season, especially not against Essendon. Hawthorn, Carlton, MCG, I'm backing Carlton in here, but who knows? This could be a game where Hawthorn rocks up and plays like they did against St Kilda and Brisbane and blow Carlton out of the water. I feel this game is a real coin flip, even though, Carlton are heavily favoured. I just think collectively Carlton are better suited, and personnel-wise, they're a lot stronger in all facets around the ground, especially with James Sicily missing. I think you can't understate how crucial James Sicily is to Hawthorn, not just as a defender and a leader, but just in general as a player with his ability. TIO Traeger Park, Melbourne taking on GWS. Melbourne know how to run TIO quite convincingly. Clayton Oliver again going to miss, no surprise to what we were saying before. GWS to put up a fight, but I think Melbourne are too strong. And Optus Stadium, St Kilda by 10 plus goals. Quite easily here. As I said, I don't see West Coast winning a game for the rest of the season. So my tips: Richmond, Geelong, Adelaide, Bulldogs, Collingwood, Port Adelaide, Carlton, Melbourne, and St Kilda. Thank you for joining me for another video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, do me a favour and hit that like button down below. Be sure to subscribe if you are new around here as well. But that's it from me, guys. I'm out of here. Good luck to your teams this weekend. And as always, I will catch you guys next time.